Welcome to this week's masterclass. We're really excited to have you here, and we're especially excited to have Dr. Christina Paul here with us. So let me tell you just a little bit about her, and then we're going to have her steer the ship and guide us through the great material that she's prepared to share with us. Dr. Paul is an internationally trained and licensed physician with extensive experience caring for patients in hospital settings, including critical care. And she spent years on the front lines supporting people in their most vulnerable moments. And she's really passionate about personalized medicine and preventive medicine and integrative medicine. So she has this really interesting background of seeing people in these really difficult moments downstream and recognizing, oh, if we were doing more upstream, maybe they wouldn't even end up in a critical care sort of situation. So now she spends her time working with busy, high achieving men and women who feel kind of off when routine checkups appear normal. And I love that because we've talked about that many times here in our membership, that sometimes you go to the doctor and you feel terrible and they look at you and they say, well, I don't know what to tell you. Everything's normal. That's where we need to dig deeper. And that's exactly what Dr. Paul does. So, drawing on years of clinical experience, she develops tailored plans through a detailed review of all health systems. She often uncovers hidden causes of fatigue and problems with weight loss and hormone imbalance and brain fog. She has a clinic called Extend Medical, which is fully virtual. So she limits her client base because she wants to be able to give really personalized attention. But she's able to help people in a variety of different areas because she's virtual. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the very capable hands of Dr. Christina Paul. And we'll just be sitting here, Dr. Paul, learning and dropping questions in the chat. But if we end, about 10 minutes or so before the top of the hour, it'll give us some time for Q&A and some back and forth. So we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Very excited to be here with you guys and to help teach a little bit about how the gut is linked with the brain. I wanted to give the presentation a little bit more of a interesting topic instead of calling it the gut-brain connection, which is essentially what we're going to talk about. So I said what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut, unfortunately. And so before I start, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay and see my screen okay. Perfect. I see lots of thumbs up. So Eric's already done an introduction, but yeah, so I'm internationally trained, and so I've practiced and trained in different areas of the world, including England, Canada, and the US. And traditionally, I started out with being an internal medicine physician, which I actually still practice in the acute care settings. It really reminds me about all the changes that we need to continue making. So I see the people on the flip side with, in my functional integrative clinic, it keeps me grounded in knowing that there's still work to do, no matter how good I make some of my patients feel, that there's a lot more lives to impact. And, my goal is in the collective with everyone, just like, the work that Eric and Randy are doing, are trying to eliminate chronic disease with empowering you guys with as much knowledge as you can to take control of your health. So feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point. I do want to make it interactive as much as you guys want it to be. So what I'll start with is just talking a little bit about the anatomy and physiology of the GI tract itself, showing how it can be linked with your brain, and then how you can test and evaluate to see the health status of it, and then what changes you can make to optimize your gut function in order to better serve your brain as well. So this matters really because your gut and your brain are constantly communicating, and there's rising rates of things like anxiety, depression, dementia, ADHD, autism, all of these brain conditions. And many of your brain symptoms start in your gut. In fact, there was a recent study that showed that constipation was a number one symptom for the primary symptom before a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And there's multiple studies like this that have come about with heavy links with the gut and the brain. So When we talk about the GI system, it really covers everything all the way from your mouth down to your rectum. And so your food going in to your stool coming out. Your food goes through your mouth into what we call the food pipe, better known as the esophagus, goes into your stomach, then enters your small intestine, and then transfers to your large intestine before it comes out. And there are so many things that's happening to our food as it goes through all these phases. The enzymes that break it down start right away from when it enters. The sensation, the texture, all of it sends different signals, and then signals for all these different digestive enzymes to come about. And the various enzymes have different versions in the different areas of your digestive system as well. So carbohydrates trigger different enzymes, proteins trigger different enzymes, fats trigger different enzymes. And as you can see here, your mouth produces things like amylase, lipase. So breaking down carbohydrates, breaking down fats, it all starts in the mouth. So chewing is really important. When it gets into your stomach, the acid-base balance triggers all the different enzymes like pepsin, intrinsic factors. Your pancreas stimulates amylase production, lipase production. More breakdown is happening in your small intestine. And your liver and your gallbladder, even though they're not directly linked with where the food passes through the pipes, as you can see here, they have different connections into your small intestine, which really contributes to the breakdown of some of these macronutrients. And the breakdown of macronutrients then contribute to the micronutrients. So this is just an overview of how everything is linked and why each part is important. The gallbladder is this little organ that sits under the liver that is linked in with an entrance into the duodenum. And so you think of things like gallstones and why the liver isn't tied into all of this. And so we'd have to be cognizant of any impacts or pathology in any areas that could then impact your gut and then therefore impact your brain. Does that make sense? So, you know, the GI tract, other than doing the breaking down of your food, the absorption and the eliminating, it actually has multiple other different functions. It actually is a primary focus of in your immune system. It has the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, better known as the GALT, and that has a lot of cytokine production, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then there's the microbiome, which we know is basically the second brain of our body, with a balance of good bacterias, bad bacterias, and making sure that they're in the right balance. So all of these play a part in making sure your GI tract function appropriately. So how is this then linked to your brain? So there's multiple different ways in how our gut is linked with our brain. And I wanted to do a high-level overview. Each of these slides can probably be a lecture in itself, but we're going to talk about the main points and then go into, and then, see if you have any questions, because I feel like a lot of the interest is going to be at the second half of this, where I'll tell you things you can change and optimize to improve your health. But we start with our nervous system. Your vagus nerve, which is the primary mode of connection between many of your organs in your body, balances your rest and digest phase in your fight or flight phase, is a big connection. And there's a lot of neurotransmitters, with about 90% of them being stimulated in your gut. Neurotransmitters are basically communication organelles that allow your brain to talk through your body and talk to different organs with each other. So they're just chemical signals between different aspects in our body. A lot of those are produced in our gut. The microbiome specifically can produce some of these neurotransmitters themselves. In terms of our immune system, so we talked about the cytokines, which again are communication molecules for the immune system. Those are linked and triggered by various aspects of our gut. So I don't know if you've heard of things like IL-6, TNF alpha. Those are all inflammatory markers that can contribute to inflammation in our body and then, stimulate neuroinflammation as well. the endocrine system. And so that's essentially all your hormones, the HPA axis, which again ties back to your vagus nerve. All of that is linked. And then stimulating those enzymes that we just reviewed with each different organs, depending on how you feel. So your mood can trigger these enzyme productions, and then the enzyme, if there's inadequate enzyme productions, your food won't be digested adequately. And so it could all be in this vicious cycle, which we'll keep referring back to. So when all of those are arrayed, like we talked about, there's in each one of these conditions, there's multiple different randomized clinical trials, even. So the highest form of studies that you can find that will link gut conditions to these brain axis dysfunctions. So whether it's Alzheimer's, autism, anxiety, depression, all of these can be linked with imbalances in your GI tract. So that's why we say it's very important to keep your GI tract optimal. One of the big things that I always hear, I always have patients come to me for is this term of leaky gut and why that's important. And so that's what we contribute, that's what we talk about contributing to things like neuroinflammation. Because at every point, if you're triggering these immune responses, they can translate to dysfunctions further and further down, and then contribute to a more pronounced dysfunction in your brain. So when there's barriers that break down, remember, because not everything we're eating is protective, our body is made to weed those out at each point. And if there's a system breakdown, then those toxins can enter our system and contribute to this inflammation, whether that's all the conditions we talked about before, ADHD, depression, anxiety, or even things that we know now with brain fog, mood changes. And at every point, you could have these cytokines or neurotransmitter imbalances contribute to your gut dysfunction. So the microbiome in itself, I felt like needed its own separate highlight, because the microbiome are essentially the bacteria that are present in your gut. It is a balance of good bacteria and bad bacteria. So we talk about the pathogenic strains and the good strains. So when you think about taking probiotics, those are taking the good strains. But even the good strains, they need to be in a balance with these bad strains. So if you have too much of the good strains, then that might offset your gut function. And definitely if you have too much of the bad strains, then that'll take over as well. And so when you have healthy gut bacteria, that really contributes to a good production of short-chain fatty acids. And these butyrates, they protect your brain, because these can contribute to gene expression. Then we see how the gut function, the gut houses your immune system as well. And so it can change your immune response. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but it can impact your blood sugars as well. And then on the flip side of it, when you have an overgrowth of these bad bacteria, then you get things like leaky gut, which essentially, because your gut is formed of a lot of tight junctions throughout its system. And if you have toxins or particles that are constantly trying to break it apart, then you'd be allowing these toxins that would have previously been filtered out of your system to be absorbed into your bloodstream. And that sort of chronic exposure leads to insulin resistance, which then, can lead to diabetes, which in itself links back to your brain conditions, and then the neural inflammation. And metabolism really is at the core of some of this. And metabolism is a lot of what I work on, because if someone's metabolism is off, which is the root of a lot of their organ systems, then you can't really fix even individual things like your gut, because your brain doesn't store glucose. It needs a steady stream provided to it throughout the day. And if you're experiencing dysfunctions in your metabolism, the first thing that will typically have a sign, you might not feel it, would be your blood sugar response. And if your blood sugar response and your energy production is off, then your gut isn't even going to need it. And digesting food and moving it along the pathway is a very active process in your body. It's something called peristalsis. Have you ever felt cramps if you've eaten something horrible? That's your gut working a little bit harder to move it along. If you are exposed to something stressful or you're nervous about something, you'll feel butterflies in your stomach. That's your brain signaling to your gut to work a little bit harder to produce more anti-inflammatory pathways. Like all of that is very heavily linked. And then the energy is needed also for the different organs within your GI system to produce the enzymes that's needed at each path to break down whether it's your carbohydrates, your fats, or your proteins. And so, in this vicious cycle, if your blood sugar or your digestion is impaired, then it can cause stress and inflammation, which then translates into your gut, which translates into your nervous system. And, I want to go back to the blood sugar a little bit more because when you eat something that, let's say something that's high in sugar, it causes these spikes, and you worry about the spikes because now there's a higher glucose load in your body. But it's not just that. So then when you experience one of these spikes, your body has to work harder to bring it down to what we consider a normal range. And while it's working harder to do that, it typically offshoots and contributes to crashes. And these spikes and crashes multiple times of the day, whether it's related to food, whether it's related to all the different things we'll talk about in terms of your stress, anxiety, all of that is really harmful to something like your brain because these energy signals can cross into your blood-brain barrier, which is actually a distinction between your brain and really the rest of your body, because your body is made to protect everything in your brain space a little bit harder. But something like these crashes and spikes is not immune, unfortunately, and a lot of these signals will cross into your blood-brain barrier and cause the downstream effects that we talked about. And so you want to try to maintain, again, another reason to try to maintain this ideal metabolism, ideal blood sugars in a tight range throughout the day. So now you know the sort of anatomy, physiology, how it can be linked. Again, on a very high level, each one of these I could go into a lot more detail. But before we go into how we find out if which areas of this need work, is there any questions that you want me to answer? I can't see the chat. Okay. So it's really important when we go to assess to make sure, in terms of your gut function, you look at the your gastrointestinal symptoms. So it will be direct symptoms like cramping, bloating, loose stools, or constipation. And we often link it with neurological symptoms as well. So, how is your mood? So, say you're constipated, how was your mood that day versus the days you have loose stools? How was your mood that day? Were you at a stressful meeting? Were you at a stressful, was it a travel day? We hear about when people go on trips where their gut is the first thing that's affected. They're out of their normal environment. All of these play a part. And so a lot of what we do that's out of traditional medicine really is time with our patients, understanding these stories and making these links. Even things like, were you exposed to antibiotics at an early age? Often children with ear diseases, upper respiratory tract illnesses, which kids are more prone to, if they've got the kind of practitioner who immediately prescribes them antibiotics and they've had multiple courses of that throughout their life, then that's really going to have a lasting impact. There's many patients who I see where they have a microbiome dysfunction that's being linked to recurrent antibiotic use when they're younger. So all of these things play a factor, and it's really gathering the story that's important. I put trauma here as well because as we've already seen how much the gut is linked to your brain, it's a cycle, right? So anything that's impacting your life to that extent, if there's any unresolved trauma and things like that, that can consistently impact your gut because if you're having this constant stimulation of your cortisol pathways, your gut-brain axis, then that's going to change your gut habits as well and contribute to that ongoing cycle. So, other than gathering the story, there's lots of different testing pathways that we can do. So, blood tests, so whether it's looking for signs of inflammation with things like CRP, homocysteine, and then just in terms of your blood counts, making sure that your hemoglobin is good because your iron's being absorbed, especially in, by production of the right enzymes, micronutrients, so your vitamins, your vitamin D, your zinc, your copper, are all of those being absorbed right. We talked about the importance of blood sugar. So looking at that, a tool that I love using is a continuous glucose monitor because you can check to see not just what your daily blood glucose is first thing in the morning or what a 3-month average is, which is known as your HbA1c, but really immediately how each food is impacting you. Because if you're getting these spikes and crashes, then you'll know that that's impacting your gut and therefore contributing to a mood dysfunction or stress or anxiety. And, those conditions over time then can lead to other things like ADHD, early dementia, and all those factors, right? So, and a stool chart. So, really being in tune with how frequently, and it might be a bit TMI, but what your stool actually looks like. I always encourage people to look in the toilet after they've had their bowel movement. You want to make sure it's formed, it's not sticky. If your stool is too sticky, that's the sign of not enough, maybe too much, the fat's not been broken down efficiently in the gut. Maybe, you'd have to target that. So yeah, always look at your stool once you've defecated. Ooh. If you've heard of the term of SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so a lot of our bacteria is housed in our large intestine, and your small intestine links into your large intestine. But if there is an overgrowth in your large intestine that seeps into your small intestine, then that produces these types of gases, which you can detect by a breath test. So what you do is the way to do it is as part of the test, you'll drink some lactulose, and you over time, you test the amount of hydrogen and methane in your breath to see if there's an overproduction of it too early. And if there is, it's a sign that that is being broken down too early, and maybe there's bacterial overgrowth in your small intestine. So that's another test to do. The gut permeability, zonulin is the name of one of those molecules that contribute to those tight junctions in your gut. So you can test levels of that. The organic acid test is a test that I love doing because it gives you a great snapshot of multiple systems in your body. And like I mentioned, it's not your gut, it's not your GI system in isolation, it's not your neurological system in isolation. Both of these systems are heavily linked, but it's not just these two. All of our organ systems, whether it's your cardiovascular system, your lymphatic system, your immune system. And we talked about how even there's immune cascades going on. The hormonal cascades are linked into your gut-brain axis. So the organic acid test really gives us a good snapshot about different breakdown products from our body's digestion system, and also can look at things like the presence of mold, parasites, and different markers of neurotransmitters and signals of if there's going to be any bacterial overgrowth. So you do all of this and you say, okay, well, so I know that the gut is important for my brain health. Well, what can I do to optimize my gut function to ensure my better brain health, right? So diet and nutrition is a really big piece. These two images I have here are actually documents that you have available to you in your toolkit on the Mind for All Seasons page. And I love it. It gives you a tracking mechanism to make sure that you're eating multiple servings of all these different colors per week, and also ideas of different things that you can eat that will contribute to optimal brain function and gut function. So overall, and these are principles you employ for just optimal living in general, but you want to remove as much ultra processed foods as possible. Ultra processed foods are foods that are far from what their original form. So if you think about potatoes. And then if you think about something like Pringles, right? So Pringles is supposed to be a potato chip, but if you look at the ingredients, it's in its farthest form from a fried potato, which is really what potato chips are meant to be. So it's examples like that. I know Eric and I once talked, and we made a joke with eating the rainbow versus, with it being these different colored fruits and vegetable versus, all the different colors of sodas and candies you can get. So it's eating the right type of rainbow, and you want to keep it diverse, because if you're eating, and we're all creatures of habit, and so if you're someone that always buys orange in the orange and yellow category, then you might be you're getting a lot of necessary micronutrients, but you need a variety, because there's a lot of micronutrients that's only present in the red family, in the green family, in the purple family. So it's really pushing yourself to get either one or two things from each of these color categories to optimize your micronutrient intake, which then will naturally contribute to enough fiber, because fiber is a really big thing to maintain good gut function. So if somebody ever talks about their stools not being in the right amount or consistency, one of the first things I look at is fiber intake, because you want to be aiming for about 30 grams of fiber per day. And if you're really hitting all these different categories and colors, then very rarely would you have to supplement with additional fiber. There are instances where even if you are, extra fiber is necessary, but you can this is such a good starting place. And same thing with protein. So yes, all well and good with eating these, but protein is a big macronutrient group that contributes to our amino acid profile. Amino acids are again another breakdown product that's necessary, with a direct link in your gut, but also in your brain, because these fatty acids come even from these amino acids. So it's all very linked. And so you're ingesting all of these, that's optimal and great, but that really, it doesn't end there, because as we talked about, your GI system really starts in your mouth and goes all the way through. And the breakdown starts right away as the food enters your mouth. So you want to chew your food really well. Um, we are all leading busy lives and eating on the go, and eating, or our meals are our second thought, with our work being primary. And so we don't really sit down and chew our food and really enjoy it, because I think I have a slide on this as well, but your mindset when you're going to eat in itself impacts how much and how your enzymes are stimulated, and therefore contributes to the breakdown. So if a person is eating the most ideal meal, but they're rushed, they've just had a stressful meeting and they're trying to chow it down, and they haven't allowed time to chew their food and go down, versus this another person eating the exact same meal. They've taken 5 breaths before they sat down. They've made sure they've sat down, number one, taken a few deep breaths. The way your enzymes are secreted is going to be very different, and therefore your food digested is going to be different, and therefore the contribution to your microbiome balance is going to be different. Your blood sugar balance is going to be different. So it's all just very heavily linked. And you want to make sure you're having 1 to 2 times a day of a bowel movement. Your bowel movement is another really what I consider a vital sign of your body. And if you're not hitting that, then we can look at different focuses of where the root cause of that might be. And there's ways to support, and I think the microbiome deserves its own section, because there's ways to support it. So we talked, when you talk about hitting all these food groups and hitting all these colors, you naturally will be having good amounts of prebiotics. And prebiotics are the things that feed good production of, or good balance of, the good and bad bacteria. And then your probiotics are literally contributing to the strains that you need to be optimal. And then what you can do on the flip side is limit your use of things like antibiotics and NSAIDs. And I throw NSAIDs in there in particular because NSAIDs are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents. And these are direct permanent inhibitors. They regenerate, yes, but permanent inhibitors of the acid-base balance in your gut. Actually, one other thing I should have thrown in there is also your acid suppressors that people seem to chronically be on. So there might be a time where they've gone to their doctor and they feel a little bit of acid reflux, and that might have been situational. It might have been in that moment, but they get put on these medications and then no one takes them off it. And chronic acid secretion, chronic acid suppression contributes to a imbalance of the enzymes that you need because acids are needed in your gut to break down your food. And so chronic suppression of that will change the breakdown of your food and therefore the appropriate absorption of the nutrients from what you're eating. And yeah, so like I talked about with your mood and how your vagus nerve will participate in optimal absorption for your gut. So there are things that you can do to make that better. So, there's breath work, and these are not only going to improve your gut function, but also generally a multi-systems approach, right? So vagal tone practices, whether that's breath work, whether that's box breathing, just taking 5 breaths before you eat, all of it, and or multiple times a day if you're experiencing stress or anxiety throughout the day. Yoga practices, meditation, just, becoming in tune with your body, all of these things will help not just your mind, but also your GI tract through all of the different impacts we talked about. Exercise, because exercise is going to help regulate your blood sugar. It's going to keep you regular in terms of your stool production. When your stool production is happier, then your digestion is happier, your absorption of nutrients is happier. Sleep, because it's really the time that your body rebuilds and recovers from everything in its day. When we talk about the different pillars of health, honestly, sleep is one of my biggest ones. It is so important. If you don't have enough time hitting in that deep REM stages, even when you make the change within 1 to 2 days, the impacts of that will last you weeks. And so catch up sleep is okay, but making it a habit is even better. And then I throw environment in there because in today's age, we're experienced to toxins, whether we like it or not. So unless you're living in, out without any internet or don't have a social life where we're not interacting with others, we are going to be exposed to toxins, whether we like it or not. Our bodies, like we talked about, have natural mechanisms to inhibit the absorption of these toxins. But if there are chronic exposures, then they will contribute to dysfunction. So trying to limit this in your environment. What am I talking about? Whether that's microplastics, so avoiding the use of plastic containers for your food, whether that's using a cleaner soap to wash your hands before you eat, whether that's even cleaning your appliances, your pots, all of that, using the right pots, so less of the PFAS and the POFAS in our nonstick pots. All of that can contribute to the environmental factors or your toxin exposure. And so finding ways to reduce that will really help your gut. So, as we talked about, your brain is really as healthy as your gut can be, and vice versa, to be honest.